Happening now, breaking news. Tense protests. Violence erupts at a demonstration at the G20 summit in Germany. Police are pelted with bottles and smoke bombs, and they turn water cannons on angry crowds to break them up. Will there be more clashes? Russian spies. Sources tell CNN that Russian agents are ramping up espionage efforts inside the United States in the wake of the presidential race with what's described as aggressive new intelligence gathering. Nobody really knows. President Trump casts fresh doubt on Moscow's meddling in the presidential campaign, questioning the unanimous consensus of the U.S. intelligence community. We're going to talk a lot more about it with the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. And severe things. President Trump accuses North Korea of behaving very dangerously and says that he's thinking about severe consequences for the Kim regime, though he won't say what they are. Are the president and the Pentagon on the same page? We want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. Wolf Blitzer is off. I'm Jim Sciutto. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news tonight, fresh protests at the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. New clashes have erupted between police in riot gear and some demonstrators, with police turning water cannons on the crowd to disperse them. Also breaking, current and former U.S. intelligence officials tell CNN that Russian spies have ramped up their intelligence gathering efforts inside the United States in the wake of the presidential election. One official says that Moscow has been emboldened by its successful interference in last year's campaign. Ahead of his meeting tomorrow with Russian President Vladimir Putin, President Trump is again questioning whether Russia was actually behind the political hacking. Sources now tell CNN that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will be the only other officials inside the room for the meeting. And the president is suggesting that a military response to North Korea's latest missile test is possible, saying that he's thinking about, quote, some pretty severe things. But his own defense secretary, James Mattis, downplaying military action, warning that it would be, quote, tragic on an unbelievable scale. We're covering all of that and more this hour with our guests, including the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, as well as our correspondents and specialists also standing by. Let's get right to the breaking news. CNN senior international correspondent Frederick Pleitgen, he is in Hamburg, Germany, for us at the scene of these violent clashes between police and G20 protesters. Frederick, what are you seeing there right now? Protests, police presence still going on?
Yeah, Jim, we're actually right in the thick of things right here. You can see there's actually, why don't I just take you over here? Because we're actually right sort of on the front line between the protesters and the police. So you'll see there's a large police presence over here. It's in a standoff at the beginning of the demonstration, which is actually right here. We just saw them set some barricades on fire a couple of minutes ago. Right now, it seems as though this sort of protest march, which was supposed to have been done a couple of hours ago, is still far from reaching the place that it wanted to reach, Jim. And if you can see over there, there's a massive police presence here in the side streets as well. And you can probably also hear, Jim, that, the mood is fairly charged here. There's been some clashes going on in the past couple of minutes. There is a lot of anger towards the police. There's bottles flying towards the police officers. And then the police are responding with water cannon trucks. So the atmosphere...
We just lost the signal there from Fred Pleitgen. We're going to go now to our White House correspondent. President Trump meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G20 tomorrow. But Mr. Trump is casting fresh doubt on Moscow's meddling in the presidential race. This despite the consensus of the U.S. intelligence community. CNN senior White House correspondent traveling with the president. We're learning new details now about who's going to be in that room tomorrow for the meeting.
We are, Jim, that's right. The Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, they'll also be in the room with Vladimir Putin and President Trump. They'll be the only four in the room besides the translators who will be for that big meeting tomorrow. But Jim, the president is back overseas, throwing his weight around on the world stage, except it seems when it comes to the subject of Russia, an area where the president continues to tread very carefully. The President of the United States once again contradicted the U.S. intelligence community assessment of Russian meddling in the 2016 election.
Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows for sure.
At a news conference in Poland, President Trump held open the possibility that other countries were involved.
Well, I think it was Russia, and I think it could have been other people in other countries. Could have been a lot of people interfered.
But even as he insisted it was not clear Moscow alone interfered in the election, the president tried to blame former President Obama for failing to stop the Russians.
He did nothing about it. Why did he do nothing about it? He was told it was Russia by the CIA, as I understand it. It was well reported. And he did nothing about it.
While even some Democrats say the Obama administration didn't go far enough, Obama did confront Russian President Vladimir Putin directly last September. And the Obama administration officially accused the Russian government of interfering in the election in October. President Trump's uncertainty on the question runs completely counter to the U.S. intelligence community's analysis.
Do you believe that the January 2017 intelligence community assessment accurately characterized the extent of Russian activities in the 2016 election and its conclusion that Russian intelligence agencies were responsible for the hacking and leaking of information and using misinformation in order to influence our elections?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yes.
The president also issued a stern warning to North Korea over its missile launch this week.
I have some pretty severe things that we're thinking about. That doesn't mean we're going to do them. I don't draw red lines.
But later in a speech, the president did make a course correction of his own, stating his support for NATO's Article 5, that an attack on one of the alliance's members is an attack on all, a stance he declined to take on his last foreign trip.
To those who would criticize our tough stance, I would point out that the United States has demonstrated, not merely with words, but with its actions, that we stand firmly behind Article 5, the mutual defense commitment.
At his next stop in Germany, the president also made sure to shake the hand of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, something they did not do during a tense meeting in the Oval Office earlier this year, although they did at other times during that White House visit. But it's his meeting with Vladimir Putin Friday that the whole world will be watching. A senior administration official said it's believed this will be Mr. Trump's first ever face-to-face encounter with Putin. The president has given a range of answers on this question in the past.
I was in Moscow recently, and I spoke indirectly and directly with President Putin, who could not have been nicer. I never met Putin. I don't know who Putin is. I have nothing to do with Putin. I've never spoken to him. I have no relationship with Putin.
But if you have no relationship with Putin, then why did you say in 2013, I do have a relationship? In 2014, I spoke...
Because he has said nice things about me over the years.
And there will be other encounters to watch here at the G20, especially any interactions between President Trump and China's President Xi. The president has complained that Xi has not done enough to rein in North Korea, but asked today if he's giving up on that relationship. The president said never give up. And as for the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin, as we said earlier, it is going to be a small crowd in the room, and it's not clear how much ground they're going to be covering in that meeting, Jim, as they'll only have about an hour, perhaps even less than that, for this scheduled meeting. Jim?
CNN's Jim Acosta in Hamburg, Germany, traveling with the president. Thank you. There is more breaking news tonight. CNN has new reporting about concern in the U.S. intelligence community over stepped-up Russian spying inside the U.S. in the wake of the 2016 presidential election. CNN Justice correspondents Pamela Brown and Evan Perez are working the story along with CNN's Shimon Prokupecz. Pamela, tell us what you've learned.
Well, Jim, we've learned that Russian spies have been ramping up their intelligence gathering efforts in the U.S. This is according to current and former U.S. intelligence officials who say they've noticed this increase since the election. And the officials that we've spoken with, some of them say that they believe one of the U.S. biggest adversaries has not been slowed by the retaliatory efforts after it meddled in the U.S. election, according to the U.S. Intelligence Committee. In fact, since the election, U.S. and law enforcement agencies have detected an uptick in suspected Russian intelligence officers entering the U.S. under the guise of other business. Now, officials we've spoken with say that the Russians have been replenishing their ranks ever since the U.S. expelled 35 Russian diplomats suspected of spying last December, as you'll recall. And in some cases, Russian spies have tried to gain employment at places with sensitive information as part of their intelligence gathering efforts, these sources say. One former senior intelligence official familiar with the concerns described it as a, quote, aggressive collection posture, and the official added that the effort was undeterred by the election meddling success. The FBI, which of course is responsible for counterintelligence efforts in the U.S., would not comment for this story, and requests for comment from the Russian embassy and the U.S. were not responded to, Jim.
Evan, if U.S. intelligence knows this, why aren't they stopping these suspected Russian operatives from entering the country?
Right. Well, we're told that counterintelligence is actually seeking to keep an eye on this activity, Jim. In some cases, the FBI uses surveillance to track the suspected Russian intelligence officers as part of their counterintelligence effort. That was how the U.S. was able to identify and expel 35 Russian diplomats accused of spying last December in response to the alleged Russian election meddling, according to officials we've talked to. Now, U.S. Law enforcement officials do say that some of the Russian diplomats have violated protocol by leaving the Washington, D.C. area without notifying the State Department. Russia has similar rules, by the way, in place for U.S. diplomats in Russia. And another issue is this ongoing frustration with the State Department over the granting of visas to people that the U.S. intelligence community suspects are actually intelligence officers. A State Department official would not comment specifically on the visas that have been issued, citing confidentiality under the Immigration and Nationality Act. The official simply said that they work with Russia where they can, and, quote, where we do not see eye to eye with Russia, the United States will continue to stand up for the interests and values of America, our allies and partners. I should mention that the DHS, the Homeland Security Department, would not comment on the Russian visa specifically, but said that there's an extensive visa process, vetting process for granting those visas.
Pamela, final questions. Why do your sources believe that this is happening now?
Well, it's a few reasons, Jim. It's multi-pronged. Even after the meddling in the U.S. elections in 2016, the U.S. under Obama and now Trump has been slow to take measures to respond to the intelligence threat, current and former U.S. officials tell us. And partisan political disagreements over the Russian activity and President Donald Trump's reluctance, as we heard today, to accept intelligence conclusions about Russia's meddling in the election has slowed efforts to counter this threat. And it's created wider tensions with Russia as well. Remember, one of the things the Obama administration did in retaliation was to shut down Russian diplomatic compounds in December. Russian officials have pressed the U.S. to return those facilities in a bid to improve relations. One former administration official said that the U.S. watched as Russians removed suspected surveillance equipment from those compounds when they were evicted. Russia, as we know, has denied the compounds were ever being used for intelligence gathering. But Russian experts we've spoken to, Jim, say as the relationship between Russia and the U.S. sours, the more Russians want to ramp up spy efforts to figure out the intentions and the plans of what they see as an adversarial government, particularly when there is a new president in office who Moscow views as unpredictable, Jim.
Pamela Brown, Evan Perez, thanks very much. We're joined now by the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, served in that role from 2010 to 2017 and has more than 4 decades of experience in intelligence. Thanks very much for taking the time with us today.
Thanks, Jim, for having me.
First, your reaction to this new CNN report. You said many times in public while you were still in your role that Russia was emboldened by its success in interfering in the U.S. election. Do you believe that's what we're seeing here now with this stepped-up espionage?
I do, Jim. And again, I don't have any official access to classified information, but this certainly fits the standard Russian pattern, which comports with their behavior going back decades. And they do want to, I'm sure, repair the loss by virtue of the 35 intelligence operatives that were expelled by the Obama administration, and that just their general push, they're going to stretch the envelope as far as they can to collect information. And I think largely to, if I could use the military phrase, prep the battlefield for 2018 elections.
Prepping, you think, putting themselves in position for further attacks?
I think they're here to reconnoiter and collect as much as they possibly can on the United States and whom they consider as their prime adversary.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the president's comment today. The president of the United States on foreign soil, visiting Poland as part of his European trip, once again cast doubt on Russia's role in the election meddling, saying it could have been others. Interestingly, and we played this earlier, echoing some of the comments we've heard from the Russian president himself. You, in your position as Director of National Intelligence, oversaw the entire U.S. intelligence community. In your view, is there any doubt about Russia's role? Absolutely none, and that has been reaffirmed by those who are still in positions of responsibility in the intelligence community. There's absolutely no doubt about it, and the high confidence levels, the multiple sources of information we had, and its high fidelity still leave me very convinced of the veracity of that report. I want to play, if I can, some of the president's comments, because he implied in his statements that there was disagreement within the intelligence community, as well as making other accusations. Let's have a quick listen.
You again say you think it was Russia. Your intelligence agencies have been far more definitive. They say it was Russia. Why won't you agree with them and say it was?
I'll tell you, let me just start off by saying I heard it was 17 agencies. I said, boy, that's a lot. Do we even have that many intelligence agencies, right? Let's check it. And we did some very heavy research. It turned out to be 3 or 4. It wasn't 17. And many of your compatriots had to change their reporting, and they had to apologize, and they had to correct. Now, with that being said, mistakes have been made. I agree. I think it was Russia, but I think it was probably other people and or countries, and I see nothing wrong with that statement. Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows for sure. I remember when I was sitting back listening about Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, how everybody was 100% sure that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And guess what? That led to one big mess. They were wrong, and it led to a mess. So it was Russia, and I think it was probably others also, and that's been going on for a long period of time. But my big question is, why did Obama do nothing about it from August all the way to November 8th? He did nothing about it, and it wasn't because he choked.
There's a lot to unwrap there because he leveled a lot of charges in the way of the U.S. intelligence community. But first on the big picture. In a foreign country, next to a foreign leader, the day before he meets Russia, the president of Russia, did he just throw the U.S. intelligence community under the bus? Well, it's hard to reach that conclusion exactly so. First of all, on the number of components, the intelligence community, yes, there are 17. The 16 components by law, plus the Office of Director of National Intelligence. When then President-elect Trump was briefed on this on the 6th of January, there were 4 of us, meaning the directors of NSA, FBI, and CIA, and myself. That's all. And we explained who did the report. So how this narrative got out there about 17 components being involved, I don't know. But the report itself makes it clear that it was the 3 agencies plus the Office of Director of National Intelligence that put this intelligence community assessment together. And as far as others doing this, well, that's news to me. We saw no evidence whatsoever that was anyone involved in this other than the Russians. As far as the infamous weapons of mass destruction of the National Intelligence Estimate that was done in October of 2002, I remember it because my fingerprints were on it. That was 15 years ago. The intelligence community has done a lot of things to make sure that never happens again. And so, yes, it's true that was a big mistake, but we have learned from it and inserted, the intelligence community has, I should say, and injected a lot of safeguards to prevent that from ever happening again. And because of that experience and my having lived through it, that's why my confidence level is so high in the veracity and fidelity of the information that went into that intelligence community assessment. Let me ask you this, because as you mentioned, the agencies, specific agencies who were involved in collecting intelligence for this assessment, the NSA monitors international communications, the CIA, of course, monitors foreign governments, FBI handling threats to the homeland, illegal activity here, and of course ODNI, which oversees it all. Folks at home might know that some of the other of 17 intelligence agencies include things like Coast Guard intelligence, right, or the Drug Enforcement Agency's intelligence wing, the Department of Energy's intelligence branch. As Director of National Intelligence, when you're making a hacking assessment, an assessment about a cyber attack. Is there any reason why you would call on the Coast Guard or the DEA or the DOE to pipe in?
The reason that we limited it to those, the three agencies plus my office, was the three agencies were the only ones that could really contribute to this report, and because of the great sensitivity of some of the sources that we depended on to make that assessment. And so others, and because of the short timeline we had to get it done, because President Obama mandated it be done before the end of his administration. There are other components of the intelligence community that have absolutely no way to contribute to such a report. The National Reconnaissance Office, which is one of the 17 components of the intelligence community, has no substantive analytic responsibility or capability. So it would not be included, nor would the services and the military services, and to include the Coast Guard. Really wouldn't have anything to contribute to this. So because of the sensitivity of the accesses, the sources, we wanted to restrict that. And because of the timeline, we did not have all components participate.
Bottom line, though, without those 17 agencies, do you have any doubt, or was there any objection from inside the intelligence community on that conclusion that Russia was behind these attacks?
Absolutely none, and I don't have any doubt yet today.
So let's go to the meeting tomorrow. You have Trump meeting Putin. Putin himself has repeatedly denied involvement in these hacks and has often cited President Trump's own expressions of doubt to bolster his own position. So to have President Trump, the day before that meeting with Putin, again express those doubts, does it give Putin ammunition?
Well, certainly it does. It gives him, I think, reassurance, and also I think it actually encourages him to keep doing what he's doing. And if these reports, which I have no doubt about their stepped-up pace of intelligence collection in this country, I think bear that out. So as long as we don't push back with the Russians and take the necessary measures to foreclose, they're going to continue.
Folks at home might not know that you served as a military intelligence officer going back to the 60s, I believe, right up to really the nation's senior-most spy. So you've seen it from top to bottom. Tell me how statements like that, and again, it's not the first time President Trump has undermined the credibility of the U.S. intelligence agencies. How does that affect the rank-and-file members of the intelligence community?
It doesn't help, but I believe that the intelligence community and the men and women in it are pretty resilient, and they will do their duty as they know it to be. And so it certainly doesn't help with the morale, I don't think. But I am absolutely convinced of the professionalism of the intelligence community and the men and women in it, and they will continue to do their duty and do what they can to tell truth to power, whether the power receives it or not.
President Trump, of course, has also raised public questions about the other line of inquiry in the Russia investigation, a whole host of questions, including whether there was possible collusion. He's referred to this entirely as a witch hunt. Should the American people see that investigation as a witch hunt?
Well, excuse me, I don't think so. I think just the opposite. I think it's in the best interest of this country, the best interest of the president, the best interest of both parties to get to the bottom of this. And that's why I have great hope for Special Counsel Bob Mueller, who I think is a brilliant choice for that, to get to the bottom of this and clear the air once and for all.
I get the sense, and I speak, and I'm sure you do, I speak to my family, I speak to friends, and sometimes they'll ask me, well, where is this investigation going? And we don't know where it's going to end up. But can you explain to the American people why it's important to continue to go down all these paths wherever they lead, and even if they lead to nowhere at the end?
Well, I think truth is a great virtue, and I think we need to get to the truth. The big picture, the big event here, of course, is the Russian interference in our election process, a fundamental pillar of this country, of our way of life. And we should know the facts, and I say we, all of us as a nation, should know the facts of what happened here. And whether or not there was collusion or not, I don't know. But we need to find that out once and for all, and to take whatever corrective actions that are necessary to prevent this in the future. Because the Russians, for their part, will keep at it.
Do you have any doubt they will try to interfere in the 2018 and 2020 elections?
No doubt at all in my mind. And next time, they could go after Republicans, which I wish people would remember. This is an assault on us, our nation, our country, and regardless of party. And we need to get to the bottom of this and figure out what to do to prevent it in the future.
Director Clapper, please stay with us. We're going to have more time, more of our exclusive interview with the former Director of National Intelligence in a moment.
Support for Situation Room comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. With Rocket Mortgage, you can apply simply and understand fully, so you can mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/situationroom. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
Breaking news, you're watching live pictures from the streets of Hamburg, Germany, where protesters there, anti-globalization protesters clashing with police, big turnout of riot police. This as leaders are gathered there for the G20 summit, including President Trump. We're back with former National Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, and we want to talk to him about the crisis sparked by North Korea's test launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. President Trump said that he is weighing a response as we speak. First, let's get the latest from CNN Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr. Barbara, there really are no good options for the president when it comes to dealing with North Korea, particularly military options.
Military options, very difficult, Jim, but in a very rare instance today here at the Pentagon, Defense Secretary James Mattis shared publicly for the first time his thinking about the North Korea situation and the launch. North Korea's new intercontinental ballistic missile rolled up to the launch pad, fired, and changed the world for President Trump.
I don't draw red lines.
After declaring the era of strategic patience is over, the North Korean threat is now a major issue at the G20 summit. President Trump trying to leave all options, from sanctions to military action, on the table.
I had some pretty severe things that we're thinking about.
In his first public statement, Defense Secretary James Mattis says diplomacy still is the priority in controlling North Korea's new missile launches.
I do not believe this capability in itself brings us closer to war, because the President's been very clear, and Secretary of State's been very clear, that we are leading with diplomatic and economic efforts.
The Secretary has long warned that war with Kim Jong-un could lead to catastrophe.
As you know, if this goes to a military solution, it is going to be tragic on an unbelievable scale.
Military options have been updated for the president, but the problem is unchanged. A limited U.S. strike poses significant risk. Kim Jong-un could quickly attack Seoul, South Korea, killing millions.
We would have to be prepared to go all in, meaning an all-out Korean war.
The U.S. does have a limited missile defense capability on land and at sea, but there are questions about its reliability in some cases.
The same situation applies. Even if we were to just take out one missile in midair, one missile on a launch stand, that could escalate to an all-out war.
The map is simple. North Korea has thousands of infantry forces and armor and artillery near the DMZ. Much of it, according to the Pentagon, in thousands of underground facilities and bunkers ready to fire on Seoul at even the hint of an attack by the U.S., which is why Secretary Mattis also rules nothing out.
The military maintains military options for the commander-in-chief.
But the essential challenge remains unchanged. The North Korean program is accelerating, and there are no signs that Kim Jong-un is even thinking about pulling back. Jim?
Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr, thanks very much. We're back now with former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. You just returned from South Korea. You also served there in the 1980s as an intelligence officer. Are there any doable, workable military options?
None that I can think of. I think the caution that Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis has expressed on numerous occasions is well put. I believe if we did some preemptory military action against North Korea, that they would, without deliberation, reflexively do what they vowed on more than one occasion, which is to change Seoul into a sea of fire. Mm-hmm. I think it would be a dreadful, reckless thing for us to do that. So I believe that the only option is diplomacy. And when I was in Pyongyang 3 years ago, to bring out a couple of our citizens and had some pretty intense and also pretty nasty exchanges with the North Koreans. And I do believe the best hope here is to engage with them. And frankly, I don't find their demand for, or their desire for at least discussions about a peace treaty. All we've had there is a 64-year-long armistice where we just stopped firing. Sitting in their shoes in Pyongyang, I was amazed, frankly, at the siege mentality and the paranoia that exists in North Korea. Everywhere they look are enemies. And so I think that I get all the rhetoric about things we're going to do, but I think you need to be very, very cautious about initiating any kind of a military action against North Korea, because all that artillery they got lined up along the DMZ will be unleashed in a heartbeat.
You're talking direct talks between the U.S. and North Korea.
I am. I would have, as I did in Seoul, at a speech I gave there, advocate we give some considerations, obviously with coordination with the stakeholders, notably the Republic of Korea, to proposing an intersection in Pyongyang, much like we had in Havana for years, to deal with a government we never recognized in Cuba.
So a U.S. diplomatic presence inside North Korea?
Exactly. Would achieve, I think, three objectives. One, to have a in-residence dialogue to gain a better understanding of what's going on in North Korea, and most importantly, perhaps, maybe more than the others, is conveying information into North Korea.
But let me ask you this, because the U.S. and other nations have spoken with North Korea before. They've made agreements, and North Korea has repeatedly violated those agreements. So how do you have faith in whatever product of those talks you have?
You don't. And this is clearly a case of trust, trust but verify with them. I think the best we can hope for is getting them to agree to a cap. In other words, stop the testings, both the underground nuclear tests as well as the missile tests, in return for serious dialogue and perhaps moving towards a peace treaty. That would also serve to deflate one of their major arguments that they make, particularly to their domestic audience, about why they need to have a fortress and spend this grotesque investment in things military in North Korea at the great expense of their people.
But you're saying the U.S. could, even should, get to the place where it recognizes North Korea as a nuclear power and maybe caps, but lives with them having nuclear weapon, intercontinental ballistic missiles?
I think the train has left the station a long time ago on whether or not North Korea will denuclearize. It was made abundantly clear to me when I was there is no way they're going to denuclearize. That was my first White House issued talking point, was you must denuclearize. Well, that is a non-starter. And they've gone to school on the likes of Muammar Gaddafi, and they saw what happened to him when he negotiated away his weapons of mass destruction. They went to school on that, and they're not going to willingly or voluntarily give up nuclear weapons.
Director Clapper,
that's their ticket to survival.
Director Clapper, thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. Breaking news just ahead. We're following fresh protests tonight at the G20 summit in Germany and clashes between police and demonstrators there. Plus, our new reporting tonight about increased Russian spying inside the U.S. Will it come up when President Trump meets Vladimir Putin tomorrow?
Mondays on TNT. Enter the provocative world of a young William Shakespeare in TNT's new drama series, Will.
We are at war, and our only weapons are words.
Told with a revolutionary visual style and modern soundtrack, the series celebrates all the love, lust, history, and brilliance of William Shakespeare. TNT's new series, Will, airs Mondays at 9, starting July 10th on TNT and on the TNT app.
President Trump is once again questioning the U.S. intelligence consensus that Russia was behind cyber attacks designed to interfere in the U.S. presidential election. Ahead of his highly anticipated meeting face-to-face with Vladimir Putin tomorrow, Mr. Trump said nobody really knows who's responsible for the interference, adding that it could have been others. Let's dig deeper now with our specialists and analysts. Of course, I just spoke with the former director of national intelligence now, James Clapper, who oversaw these assessments and the agencies who made this judgment, John Kirby. His words, he said, Russia is in fact prepping the battlefield for interfering in elections in 2018 and 2020. That's an alarming prospect.
It is, but I completely agree with him. I think it's absolutely right. And they believe they got away with it in 2016, so why wouldn't they want to try it? And look, Ukraine 2014, Germany this year, maybe even France in their presidential elections this year. It's not like the Russians don't have experience in this and are going to keep sharpening that experience and use it again.
Matt Rosenberg, you cover this beat closely, as I do. Let's dispel this notion for a moment that this is a partisan judgment here, that it's Democrats who think Russia did and Russia didn't. The fact is this is bipartisan and it's intel community wide, is it not?
It's throughout the entire intelligence community. Every official and now officials that are in the Trump administration have said, yes, we believe Russia sought to interfere in the presidential election. And they're still trying and they're still laying the groundwork for future interference. I think the president and people around him are going to have to reckon with the fact that Vladimir Putin does not share their interests. He shares Russia's interests. And that in 2016, that was hurting Hillary Clinton, probably, maybe helping Mr. Trump. It may not be that way in 2018. And that if the goal here is to simply undermine America, well, you run America now. So you're going to have to figure out how to stop that at some point.
David Chao, the president again today raised this prospect that others could have done this, going back to the old 400-pound guy on his sofa. So I asked Director Clapper, who again, top spy in the country, oversaw the agencies who did this report, has seen literally all the classified intelligence. He said he's seen no evidence that others have done this. The president's been briefed on this repeatedly. Why does he say that?
What I think is even more alarming than not acknowledging just flat out, full stop, the Russians did this, is the fact that he seems to not at all think that it was a significant development, that it was sort of run of the mill, that this happens all the time, that it's been happening for years. I understand that there has been interference in the past. I'm not suggesting it's the first time, but that tone from the president today suggests to me that the battlefield that's being prepared that Clapper told you about is not at all a battle that Donald Trump is interested in fighting. And so what does that mean for the sanctity and freedom of our elections, of the United States elections here at home, if the leader of the country doesn't really see it as a significant development? That, to me, is far more alarming than him coming out with some definitive statement that Russia did it in the last election. It's his lack of interest in protecting it for the future election.
And on the eve of sitting down face-to-face with the man that the U.S. intelligence community assessed with confidence directed these attacks. Rebecca Berg, I want to play some sound of Trump today and some sound of Vladimir Putin and compare how they speak about the hacking. Go ahead.
Well, I think it was Russia, and I think it could have been other people in other countries. Could have been a lot of people interfered. I said it very simply. I think it could very well have been Russia, but I think it could well have been other countries, and I won't be specific. But I think a lot of people interfere. I think it's been happening for a long time. It's been happening for many, many years.
Hackers can be anywhere. They can be in Russia, in Asia, even in America, Latin America. They can even be hackers, by the way, in the United States, who very skillfully and professionally shifted the blame, as we say, onto Russia. Could you accept that?
Putin and Trump, they're virtually on message about Russian hacking, undermining the intelligence community's assessment.
Absolutely. For different reasons, of course. Vladimir Putin's incentive here was to influence the U.S. election. Donald Trump's incentive to keep brushing this aside, dismissing it, is much more personal. He feels, or has suggested that he feels, that this delegitimizes his presidency in some sense. And so he just doesn't want to address it because it is so personal for him. And then he also has this deep skepticism of the intelligence community and their assessment, which I think is also reflected in his approach to this. But if Donald Trump campaigned on being this strong leader who would show strength toward other countries and toward countries who would antagonize the United States, this is sort of the opposite of that. We had a country directly trying to influence and interfere in our elections, and he's just doing nothing, saying nothing.
John Kirby, you're aware of CNN's new reporting that there's evidence of increased, in fact, Russian espionage activity in the U.S. based in part, the assessment is, on their success in interfering in the 2016 election. You've served in government. You've dealt with national security threats for some time. If the President of the United States will not acknowledge, one, the perpetrator, but two, the seriousness of this, what is your confidence that this administration is going to fight this increased Russian espionage?
Little confidence at all. I mean, clearly they're turning their back on this. Look, the Russians, they've always had an espionage effort here. That's not new. But they obviously feel emboldened by their success. They're also, some of this is retaliation, I'm sure. They're still angry that we kicked out 35 of their diplomats and shut down their spying compounds there in Maryland. And some of it also is, I think, the unpredictability of Trump. I think there's a little bit of buyer's remorse. Now they got this guy that they helped get elected, and they're not sure which way he's going. And to Matt's excellent point, we got 2 elections coming up, and this administration may not be on the winning side of Russia's espionage efforts and interference going forward.
David and Matthew, you have to help me understand the politics a little bit here. I mean, this is the Republican Party. This is the party of Reagan, right? You know, who built his name and his reputation on standing up to the Soviet Union, tear down that wall, etc. And yet you've had this remarkable turn among the Republican base. They used to view Russia as a threat a couple of years ago. Now they view it more as a friend. Deep doubts among the Republican base about the veracity of this investigation, etc. Explain to me the politics. I mean, is this a winner for Donald Trump?
Well, it's certainly a winner with his base because he portrays it as a battle against the media, not really necessarily on the substance. But that certainly is a winner for Donald Trump with his base. I do think, though, that when you are looking at the politics, it's not uniformly across the Republican Party, which is why his scripted speech today actually had very tough language for Russia and was exactly the kind of language that you would expect the Republican Party establishment, foreign policy thinking establishment, especially from the more hawkish side, let's say, would put into a speech. That was on the prepared, vetted, written speech for the president.
But on Ukraine, not on election meddling.
Yes, right. But when in a press conference and he's sort of freewheeling with his own thoughts, you get such a different side of what Donald Trump is thinking that is not at all in alignment with the orthodoxy of the Republicans.
And there was no election meddling in the speech, too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That was not scripted. So you have a face-to-face tomorrow where Trump can say whatever he wants. I mean, we know he has a briefing book. We know he has prepared notes and talking points, et cetera. But, in fact, when you look at previous meetings, for instance, with the Russian foreign minister a short time ago, there were some off-the-cuff remarks, one might say.
I'm sure there are people on Trump's staff who are just praying. The man reads his briefing books, sticks to the script. Because when he met the Russian foreign minister, you know, he's in there, he's smiling with them, talking about firing the FBI director. The guy was crazy, the nut job, whatever he said. They don't want a repeat of that. But Trump does kind of go off the script. And Putin is really good at working with people. Remember George Bush said, what did he say? He saw into his soul or something? Yeah. You know, Putin has charmed leaders before, and we'll see what happens with Trump.
And look, this bilat's smaller now than we thought originally it was going to be. When I first heard it was a bilat, I thought it was going to be what I've seen in the past, where you have 8, 10 people on each side of the table. Now it's just going to be the 2 presidents and their foreign ministers and maybe a note taker or 2. That gives him more freedom to be a little bit more at free play, and I think that is dangerous.
And Matt makes an excellent point about Vladimir Putin being able to charm Donald Trump, because we've already sort of seen that in action during the campaign when Vladimir Putin complimented Trump, praised him, said he was, very smart, doing a great job, and Donald Trump responded, well, Vladimir Putin, he must be a smart guy, right. and responded very positively.
He said nice things about it. Listen, Rebecca, John, David, Matt, thanks as always. Stay with us. There's more right after this.
Heyo! Trey Kirby here from The Starters, and I'll be joined by Skeets, Tass, and Lee in Las Vegas for NBA Las Vegas Summer League live on NBA TV, July 7th through 11. After that night's final game, we'll talk to some of the top rookies in the 2017 draft class, and more than likely, we're going to give them a cake. What are they going to do with that cake? Only way to find out is by watching.
This Sunday night, CNN presents the new original series, The 90s, exploring the decade that brought us the Clintons, dial-up modems, Nirvana, Seinfeld, and the spectacle that gripped the nation, the O.J. Simpson trial.
The O.J. Simpson case was such a national phenomenon that those of us who were covering it just lived this case 24 hours a day because there was so much demand for people talking about it.
as Simpson struggled to slide the gloves onto his hands and turned toward jurors saying they're too small. Prosecutors were incensed.
The trial was on television during the hours that had traditionally been the time for soap operas.
He appears to have pulled the gloves on, counsel.
And O.J. was very much a soap opera.
He's impeached by his own witness.
I ask that you put a stop to it. Either put Cordoba on the stand
Excuse me, Mr.
or
Bailey.
stop her from telling
Stand up and speak when it's your turn.
No question that the best TV show of the 90s was the O.J. Simpson trial, and everybody on it was riveting.
NBC News in depth tonight. The Simpson trial finally winding to a close.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A.
The verdict of the O.J. Simpson trial, viewed by 150 million people. It's more people than watch presidential election returns. That's crazy.
Jeffrey Toobin joins us now, certainly knows a thing or two about the O.J. Simpson trial. You covered it. Why such a phenomenon in the decade and the century, really?
Well, think about this, Brother Jim. The O.J. case had everything that obsessed the American people. It had sex, it had race, it had violence, it had Hollywood, it had sports, and the only eyewitness was a dog. So, what more did you need? And it was on television, and it was on CNN. And one of the fascinating things about this documentary is that it points out that there was only CNN in 1994 and 1995. There was no MSNBC. There was no Fox News. And both of them were started in part in response to the ratings that the O.J. case got.
And it's interesting, race such a central role in this, and sometimes we think that the divisions in the country today are somehow new, but this is that O.J. that chase we're seeing right now is more than 20 years ago.
It's true. And, what's so interesting about this documentary is that, it's full of great clips from all the shows we like. But one of the points it makes that I hadn't really thought of is that the 80s were basically a sunnier time in America, even though the economy was so good in the 90s. The classic television show of the 80s was The Cosby Show, which at least at the time seemed like this very happy view of America. And the documentary makes the point that in the 90s, it really began with The Simpsons on television, which was much more cynical. Seinfeld, which was all about, these characters who were funny but not terribly likable. And it finishes with The Sopranos, who are sort of, nothing but dark and fascinating and fundamentally unlikable as well. And sort of that shift of television getting grittier and more, realistic and darker is something that I hadn't really thought about, but the documentary certainly makes that case.
You're a lawyer as well. O.J., he has a parole hearing later this month for a separate crime, armed robbery in 2007. A chance for parole here?
There is a chance. One of the things, just like it's kind of shocking to think that Monica Lewinsky is in her early 40s now, O.J. Simpson is almost 70 years old, and there are not many people that age still in prison. He also got a very long sentence for a very peculiar crime. As I have, said many times, I think he should be serving life in prison for killing Ronald Goldman and Nicole Brown. But this case was a pretty bogus case, and frankly, it seemed like he might get out because he's already served quite a few years already.
Jeffrey Toobin, thanks very much. The original series, The 90s, airs this Sunday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time and Pacific, only here on CNN. I'm Jim Sciutto. Thanks very much for watching. Aaron Burnett Out Front starts right now.
Up front next. Hey, before you go, we wanted to let you know that we just launched the ability for anyone to advertise on CNN Podcasts. You're just a few clicks away from reaching millions of people in a way that you never have before. Advertise for a business, event, or kick off an awareness campaign for your brand. Start today at purewinning.com/CNN. Integrating podcasts into your marketing mix has never been easier. We'll even tell you how to save 15% on your CNN campaigns for the rest of 2017. Go to purewinning.com/CNN to get started.